All right, guys, today we're going to talk about a few things. One is moving objects from Illustrator to Adobe Animate, animating those objects, and then exporting them to Muse, and then in Muse using scroll effects to animate those and include sort of rich interactivity. So first of all, I've created some objects here in Illustrator, some abstract icons. What we're going to do is we're going to select and copy these one of these icons. And in fact, the icons need to be selected individually because to animate them, they need to be individual objects. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to copy this left-hand side of this hexagon in, and I'm going to go to Adobe Animate now. And let's start out by creating a new HTML5 canvas right here where it says new HTML5 canvas. That's what we want. And here you can see in your properties over here you can set the size of your document. We'll leave it at 550 by 400, but you could set this to anything you want, 1920 by 1080 if you're rendering for video, or some other dimension if it's a banner ad or something like that. So a little bit of history surrounding Animate. It used to be called Adobe Flash, which you could do rich interactive animations in Flash on the web, and then no longer do Apple devices or mobile devices for that matter accept Flash. So instead of eliminating Flash, Adobe decided to create a platform that was a derivative of Flash called Adobe Edge Animate, now called just Animate CC. And this will allow you to export your animations as HTML5, which is very cool because now that allows you to export and create banner ads in Animate or use it for your Muse website, which makes it very cool. So there you go. We're going to create an HTML5 document here, or specifically we're going to create an OAM file. We'll get to that later. So we've got a new document here. I'm just going to go and paste in, Command V, paste in my Illustrator file that I had. I'm going to use these criteria and paste in. So there's my object, and I can move it over here. And you can see down in the bottom here I now have a timeline. We'll go over this in a second. And you can kind of move this in and scale it. We're not going to scale it, we're going to leave it as is. And I'm going to go back to Illustrator, copy, and back to Animate, paste this in, and we'll kind of align it here as its starting point. So what I'd like users to do is be able to, when they scroll down, that these two things open up, they kind of move to the side, and maybe there's some content that shows or something. All right, so I've got two layers, one for each object, and they're like Photoshop in that you can turn them on and turn them off and lock them. Also, it's similar to After Effects in that you start with these what we call keyframes. It looks a little bit different than After Effects, but this is what Animate is and uses. So these are keyframes. We know they're keyframes because they have the little black dot inside of them. So we're going to go to, let's say, keyframe number 30. And on keyframe number 30, we're going to control click and go to insert keyframe. Again, control click, insert keyframe, and that will repeat whatever object was on the previous keyframe. So now we have two identical keyframes, one at frame 1, one at frame 30. Let's do the same thing for our second layer. Control click, insert keyframe, and it's going to duplicate that keyframe. So now when we scrub our playhead, it's the same object there the entire time. Then on this second place in time, we can move this to the side, and then we can click the other one, move that one to the side. And unlike After Effects, it doesn't automatically tween for you between these frames. You have to actually control click and go to create shape tween. Control click anywhere between these two keyframes. Control click, create shape tween. And then when you see you scrub the playhead, it will animate those objects for you. One last thing you could do over when you select any of those two keyframes here is you can change the easing. Easing means it will make it more naturalistic motion, so you can go to 100. And now you can see when I hit return and play my movie, it kind of starts them out fast and then slows them down at the end. Okay, 100 is the max, unfortunately, but that's about all you need. Okay, so our animation's playing properly and it works. Okay, if we wanted to, we could reverse the animation or do some other fancier things, but for now, let's leave it simple. Now we're ready to export our animation. So to do that, you're going to go up to File, Publish Settings. Publish Settings. Under Publish Settings, you have JavaScript, JPEG, OAM, SVG. We're going to go to an OAM package. This will package it for Muse for use later. And then when you go back up to JavaScript HTML, because you'll need the JavaScript to run the HTML on your site, JavaScript HTML, you're going to unclick Loop Timeline. You could loop it if you wanted to, but we don't want to, so we're going to unloop it. And then we're going to make responsive if you'd like. You could make that scale to the visible area, or you could just make it responsive, meaning it's going to, when you scale the size of the browser down, it'll scale as well. If you want a preloader, if it's a large file, then you may need a preloader, but you won't probably need it for this one. And we'll leave the rest as is. Then we'll go down to the bottom where it says Publish and publish this document. Now, one thing I forgot to do is save this file first. So let's save it as animation test.fla and hit save. Now when we go to publish settings, publish, now we can see that that OAM file plus the JavaScript file and the HTML file are all in the same folder with the animation file we just created. So this is the one we're looking for, animation.text.oam. That's the key post script that we're looking for, or suffix. Okay, so hit publish. It will write over the old one if you've made any changes. One last thing I was going to show you is that in your animate file, if you don't want the Muse file to have a background like this, you can go to your stage color in your properties bar, click the alpha and make that 0. That will make your stage transparent. And now we're done with Illustrator, we're done with Animate, we're now ready to go to Muse. And let me close this one out. We will create a new Muse file for now. We'll use fluid width. Double click home. And then if you remember, in order to use scroll effects, we need to make the breakpoint a fixed width. So if you double click your breakpoint modifier at the top of the screen, you can go to fluid width to fixed width. That's what we want, fixed width. Hit OK. We'll get to responsive widths next week, but for today, that's what we'll leave it at. Now we want to also take the size of the screen, and we're going to kind of make a tall web page so it's scrollable. That'll help us when we animate our elements. Okay. And if you wanted to preview, you could check out your preview just to make sure you've got a nice large white space here. Let's just add a background so we can see kind of what we're getting. New browser fill. A certain color here. Good. All right, now we're ready to go to File, Place, and we're going to place in our file. So we've got to go find it. Under THD. There it is, animation task.oam. You'll notice it's only accepting OAM files. Another easier way to do this is if you've already got your Finder window open with animation test.oam, you can just drag that straight in, and there you go. Okay. Now, if we just play this, like if we just go to pub preview, let's just see what happens to start. There you go. So it plays it once through. It doesn't loop it. If you wanted to loop it, you could. And there you go. Let's go back to design. And now let's go to animation. And let's set, we'll leave the sort of key position right there at 20 pixels. And then let's say we wanted to autoplay. Let's set the key position to 62. Let's set the autoplay, and it'll autoplay at 62 pixels. Let's go ahead and preview now. So when it reaches 62 pixels, it will now play that animation once through. See how that works? As you scroll down, it hits that certain point, and it plays through the animation. The last thing we're going to do is advance 1 second for every 20 pixels. Let's change that to maybe 30 pixels. And now we'll leave the, what do they call this? The key position at 62. And we'll hit preview. And there you go. Now, it's not working as you would expect. It did not work perfectly. So there's some things you can do. One thing I found, there's a bug in animate that I looked up and tried to find the answer to. Nobody could find an answer to. In that, when you use this advance 1 second for every certain amount of pixels, it will automatically loop it, which is unfortunate. So we don't want to loop it automatically. So that stinks. We'll show a workaround for that in a second. But that's too bad. So if you want it to only play once, you just do the autoplay, and that'll just play it through once when it gets to that section. Might be the way to do it. Let's try changing this to 100 to slow it down, essentially. Now that slows it down a little bit. As you can see, it kind of runs the animation that scrolls, but as we keep scrolling, it loops through. It keeps looping through. Let's set this to 150 and see how much slower we can get it to go. A little better, but still looping. But you can see how you can get it to work. Now, one thing you could do is to make it look like it's actually stopped. The workaround, I would go back to your animate timeline, and you could go to somewhere in the future like 540, insert keyframe. So now when we have our animation, basically it plays, and it's still playing, but it looks like it's stopped animating. Okay, so let's hit return again. We probably don't need that many keyframes, so we'll move these back to something not too so severe, maybe 200 somewhere. And then we can select the rest of these frames back here. I'm trying to reduce the file size a little bit, right? So I'm going to delete or remove these frames. So now I have an animation that plays and it stops essentially. Probably at frame 100, actually. We could probably get away with, at frame 100, having it stop. Probably only need that much. And then I'm going to go to File, Publish Settings again, and Publish, and make sure it writes over that old animation test. And then for some reason, in Muse, it doesn't automatically update the file for me sometimes, so I'll have to delete the old one, paste the new one in, and try this. All right, so let's go to auto advanced. Let's go to 200, see if that slows it down even more. We could also slow it down in our page or in our flat or animation file, but we'll try it here. So that seems to work pretty good. It opens, on scroll, and kind of closes too. And it looks like it stops. So if we had more content down here, if I added more, took the size of my page down even more, you would scroll past it and you wouldn't even know that it. I'm putting content down there. Anyway, you see what's happening. And that's it from going from Illustrator to animate to Muse to create an interactive animation.